Hello, everyone. Good evening. 7 o'clock here in the East in Vermont. Mark Canella here. We're going to start the presentation in a minute or two. We're giving more people a chance to join through the lobby. Just as a heads up, we've got everyone automatically muted for the time being so that I can get through a presentation for about 45 minutes. And then if all goes well, if we're all still conscious after a lot of financial numbers, we'll have some time for Q&A, and then we'll unlock everyone's microphone if they want to ask questions. So just hang tight for another minute. We'll get everybody in and get started. Thanks everyone if you're just joining in. We're gonna wait another minute or two as we get some last people in through the lobby, and then we'll start tonight's presentation. All right, well, hello everyone. This is Mark Canella, University of Vermont Extension. I'm here in Berlin, Montpelier, Vermont. Thanks for joining us. Little housekeeping, we do have everyone muted for the bulk of the presentation period so that I can get a chance to get through some slides. We will definitely open it up for Q&A, hopefully by around 7:45, 7:50. If you do have questions and you don't want to save them, you can type them in the chat box. With Teams, there's a little ribbon. For me, it's at the top, and there's a little bit of a cartoon bubble. Click that and feel free to chime in with questions. We will hold the questions until the end. And thanks to Mark Isselhard, our UVM Maple specialist. He's behind the scenes here, and he'll help read some of those questions off when we get to that point. Mark, I've also got the participant window disabled, so if you could keep an eye on if anyone comes in through the waiting room and let them in. I'm not sure that I can present and do that. Let's see other things. Feel free, if people want to use the chat box right now just to test it out. It's always great to hear who's on the line, where you're from. People like to share how many taps they've got or something about their enterprise, or if you're just getting started, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm going to start off with some slides. Great. So getting the slides rolling here. Maple Startup Investment and Financial Benchmarks. I just want to give a special thanks and some credit to Rob Gay with Viewpoint Ag Valuation and Consulting. Rob and I have been working together for the past several months to prepare some of this material, investment startup costs for different profiles of maple businesses. So special thanks to Rob. I'm also going to give people maybe like a little heads up about what to expect here. We're gonna do a lot of numbers. I'm gonna do a lot of numbers, and I got tired just preparing this presentation, which isn't a bad thing, but we know numbers are dense. So one of the suggestions I'm going to give to people is if you're viewing this from a particular scale or a particular perspective, just kind of try to filter out the numbers that I share. I'll be sharing a lot of numbers for enterprises at different scales, 3,000 taps, 5,000 taps, 10,000 taps. So just know that we may be scooting by your scale and talking about some other ones, but that's, I guess, my tip for you is to think about the scale you're at, and then also maybe make some notes. All this information will be shared after I've got the slides available, and we'll be putting out actually some fact sheets in the coming months. So make some notes as we go, but don't feel like you've got to absorb every number that I share. We'll get those out in publications, and hopefully we can have a rich conversation after I get done sharing some of these numbers. I do want to give another update too. We do have a live captioning available. If you go in the chat window, it looks like Christy has just posted closed captioning links, and Jordan, if you go back up the chat box there, Jordan would have posted that earlier as well. Last note for people is I'm going to reference the benchmark report that was just published online. And if you scroll way back up in the chat window, you'll see the link to that 2019 benchmark report online. That's another option for you just to check out now or later. All right, so we'll get into it here. Want to make sure everyone's aware of the Maple Resource Library we've got growing at www.maplemanager.org. We've got a variety of business planning tools, a number of legal resources and templates, and these benchmark reports are also at that website. So feel free to check that out. We do have an Ask the Team feature as well. So if anyone has questions, if you send that in, it'll go to myself, Mark Isselhart, and a couple other researchers here at UVM. And it might take us a little while. We're still learning how to monitor it. But if you do have questions about maple business or maple forestry and the tree side of things, you can send questions in there. Here's a list of the upcoming webinars. We had total yields from red maple last week. And then coming up in the next few weeks in August, best practices for birch syrup flavor with Dr. Abby Vandenberg. Mark Iselhart will be presenting on sugar bush inventory methods later in August. And then in September, Chris Lindgren will be presenting on sap-only enterprises. And then you can see a couple more sessions in September and through October. Again, all that stuff's available, www.maplemanager.org. Couple more resources for you if you're not aware of these already. Mapleresearch.org, great website. A lot of the previous literature, some of the publications in the newspapers, industry trade articles, as well as some research articles are all being archived on mapleresearch.org. The UVM Proctor Maple YouTube channel, another great source for videos. And I think Mark and Abby have been adding more videos every few months on that. And then Mark Iselhart, my colleague, who's also on this presentation, he maintains a pretty robust website with UVM Extension Maple program. Great resources there. I want to put out a special thanks to the maple producers that have worked with myself and my team on our maple benchmarking program since 2014. We've been working with maple producers. We've been doing confidential financial analysis on their records, and the producers have agreed to allow us to use those records for presentations like this. We take people's names away, we do some rounding, and we do things to preserve privacy. But just a special thanks to those producers that have really opened their books. And the vision was that people would open their books to us for research and allow us to teach folks like you all that are tuned in today about some of the dynamics, the behind the scenes of the financials of these maple enterprises. So real special thanks to those producers. And then also to let people know we are still looking for participants. Every year we've changed the dynamic of who we're looking for to kind of target different research questions. So for the next 2 years, we are specifically looking for larger TAP enterprises, 15,000 TAPs and higher across the Northeast states. We also recognize that we've had interest from people that are doing significant retail sales that maybe don't hit those TAP counts. So the criteria right now for eligibility in the program is $100,000 in gross sales in any 1 year or more. That's our profile now, may change in a few years. We're working with people in different states, and as we get more advisors in different states, if your region is sort of represented by a different profile of business scale or type of marketing, that's fine. I think our hope is to see maybe different pods of these projects pop up. We're also looking for SAP-only producers, so if you're involved in SAP-only, that's something we'd be interested in seeing if you'd participate. There's more information on my website. You can go to maplemanager.org, or you can go to the UVM Extension Agricultural Business Program, and you'll see a specific maple business section there. Just as a heads up, we've got some advisors right now actively. I know we've got capacity in Maine, New Hampshire, a couple more slots in Vermont, and options in New York as well. We do have an advisor that can cover northern Massachusetts. We haven't anchored in people in any of the other states yet, and that may be something maybe in the next couple of years we can work towards. All right, financial benchmark. So, big picture, why do we do this work? Definitely a lot of my work has been kitchen table analysis with maple producers, and we're looking for a way to measure and identify the business situation. The diagnostics, this is the check-in, the going to the doctor and taking your thermometer and your weight. This is what we do for financials with business. We sit down, we kind of assess the record keeping system, and we start to crunch numbers and figure out what's going on with the business. Do we like what's going on? Do we want to change what's going on? All these measurements and indicators often become a way to monitor business performance over time, and I think that's key. No business is perfect ever. Everyone wants to change. Everyone needs to change. So we start to establish these metrics and we watch them over time. And ideally, it gives business managers that information, that dashboard, so to speak, so they can figure out if they're going in the right direction or if they need to make some changes. The emphasis of this presentation really is that third bullet, information for startups. We want people that are getting into Maple, we want them to have a good sense of what the financial dynamic is. We want them to have an understanding of scale of where they might want to be, business operation, how many taps. We also want to recognize the significant capital investment in starting a maple operation with modern maple technology, and that leads us to capital access. So some of this presentation is for you all thinking about your own business plan. These presentations are often really important for lenders in the agricultural community, other people that may be contributing capital into the maple industry at large. And that's certainly a goal of this work for us here at UVM, is to help the producers and also keep that capital flowing and make sure it's responsible and kind of wise borrowing when it needs to be borrowed, so that people on all ends can know what to expect. I'm going to give you a couple nuggets from our 2019 benchmark report. The report is available online, and like I said earlier, today I'm going to focus mostly on the startup investments, but I couldn't waste a chance to talk a little bit about the other benchmark results. So here's a couple of them here, and then definitely check out the full report online. So what do we see in the 2019 analysis? First of all, we see that marketing strategies are a significant driver of costs. Yes, the way you make your maple syrup has impact in cost, but we know from doing this for going on 6-7 years now, human beings are the most expensive piece of the cost formula on a maple enterprise, and people that direct market put a lot of additional human effort into the business that really exceeds anything that would be expected from just the production side. So we know that the marketing strategy is really going to be a big influencer on the cost structure of any one particular enterprise. Going to bullet 2, we saw this in 2019. The larger bulk producers definitely demonstrate lower costs. And when I say larger, we work with producers from about 7,000 taps up to over 70,000 taps. And as we see businesses grow above 15,000 taps, we really see we do see some reduction in costs. Not all the time, and I think that's important to say that when we do these analyses with 10, 15 producers, it's really difficult to say it's statistically significant. This is a small sample. We do see larger producers that can run high costs for different reasons, but important to recognize that those large bulk producers often can achieve a cost of production between $1.80 a pound and $2.20 a pound. I was in presentations a couple years ago, back when we were in person. I was at conferences, and I remember hearing some people that I knew had over 80,000 taps making comments in public saying, I'm not worried about the price of maple being at $2 a pound. I think we'll be fine. I think I just want to emphasize that someone who's operating from 60,000 taps, 70, 80, 100,000 taps has a dramatically different cost profile than someone operating at 3,000, 4,000, or something of that nature. So I think that's important to indicate. Scale doesn't always dictate the costs, but larger producers are often producing at a lower cost of production and may have a different relationship with the market price than somebody whose costs may be running at $2.40 or $2.50 a pound. Okay, another bullet here, the mixed bulk and wholesale enterprises. So folks that are selling bulk, but they also have a significant, maybe over 15 or 20% of their sales going to wholesale channels or to, it says resale, it's supposed to say retail. They definitely have higher costs. And this is the marketing time. This is the human effort that we track through the benchmark analysis. We do ask people to estimate the time they spend on their business. And when people are making sales calls or servicing deliveries, that counts as a cost, and we track that. There's no volunteer time in these enterprise analysis projects we do here. So the more mixed bulk, wholesale, and retail producers are going to be up to $3.38 a pound on average for us, or about $40 equivalent a gallon in the 2019 study. Couple more important thoughts here on the 2019 results. Profitability. We all talk about profitability as the direction we want to head. It's not always directly linked to low production costs or the scale of operation. I indicated that the larger operations can often achieve a lower cost of production, but not all the time. And I want to emphasize that just having a low cost of production doesn't mean you're going to be profitable, which leads to the last bullet, that from my observations, and especially talking to astute business managers, we know that profitability is really driven by this interaction of the cost that they're facing and the revenue that they're generating. So it's both. It's not an either or. It's not I'm going to be a low cost producer or I'm going to be a high cost producer and I'm going to retail. It's the balance. Where are my costs at? And understanding your break even cost, and then understanding how to market your syrup to the right channel at the right price. And those what I'd say is the take home for profitability. It's not just costs. It's not just chasing high revenue. It's finding that balance and finding that right pricing strategy within your enterprise. Okay, the bulk of today's presentation, really going to get into investments. This is something from our 2019 report, um, looking at the investment or the valuation of the intermediate assets on a business. This does not include real estate, and as I get through this presentation, you'll see how we can add in factors for real estate. So this is a whole business investment level. This is everything from toolboxes and welding equipment to snowmobiles, everything that would occur that we tracked when we went out and worked with businesses and said, what do you have? What are the things you own? And we saw this. We saw the investment per tap, $62 and $62 for everyone will average in our range of 5,000 taps to 8,400 taps, and similar average in our small group of people from 8,500 taps to about 15,000 taps. We do see a drop down in the investment level on a per tap basis. Once we get into the larger enterprises, like I said, we had a few enterprises from 15,000 up to 60,000. It's a big range there, but that did start to drive down the investment per tap. And we know there's some economies of scales at larger tap numbers, and we'll get into that a little bit more. The one thing I want to emphasize here is the benchmark reports are actual businesses going down with a clipboard and tracking every item that we can get our hands on and putting a valuation on that. That's going to be different than what I'm going to shift to. What I'm going to shift to is a startup investment estimate that I was working on with Rob Gay, and we'll talk about the dynamics of the two, but I want to show these numbers first. $62 a tap, $62 a tap, $50 a tap, without real estate. And you can add that or multiply that by your tap number just to kind of get a factor in your head of what that adds up to. So again, special thanks to Rob. Contrary to this photo, we're not talking about horse-drawn sap collection and we're buckets. This is definitely looking at the most modern technology out there that's feasible to adopt, and what does it cost to set it up. So we worked with at least 2 to 3 equipment manufacturers on each profile. There's some subjectivity in here in sizing some equipment, and I'll discuss some of those assumptions, but we did our best to do some averaging and kind of figure out ballpark. What is that startup going to be? And we think it's important for you all to hear this from a non-commercial body. UVM is not selling stainless steel. So this is nothing against the individual manufacturers, but we thought it'd be good to do a little averaging and at least create a template for people to build their startups from. I'm going to show you different profiles for sap collection, and then also profiles that combine the sap and the syrup processing in the sugar house into a whole business. And we've got different scales and different growth stages that we try to identify through our research here, things that we think are relevant, where if someone may be at a certain scale and maybe where we think that next step up could be or should be. So we're going to start with SAP only profiles, startup investments for SAP only. And here's some assumptions. You may not like all the assumptions, but I want to share them with you. And then you can, when we publish these documents, you can start to manipulate and adapt them for your own situation. But we've had some people say, hey, this is a reasonable way of approaching this. This is a reasonable way to think about kind of a lean and mean startup. Important thing for here to know, the profiles I'll show you to start, assume that the sap is being picked up at the tank by a sap buyer, that there are buyers in your region that are going around and hauling. I have an additional truck and hauling estimate that I'll add on later that I can show you as a factor, but the starting numbers are going to be assuming the sap is picked up at the tank. We're looking at a kind of a retail option with a little bit of a discount from dealers. So assuming you're doing a big investment, we think you'll get a little bit off the sticker price. These SAP only profiles do include a 40-foot shipping container as sort of a contained unit that can have an insulated pump room and also serve as storage for some of the key equipment and materials that you're going to need on site, and hopefully, locked and safe. We certainly do hear situations with vandalism and theft from time to time, which is unfortunate, but something that business managers need to consider when they've got their tools lined up somewhere. We also include some limited site work and 200 amp electric hookup, assuming sort of a short run to get the hookup done. Like I said, a lot of specifics will come out in the publications today. I just want to cruise through some numbers and kind of give everyone the ballpark. How many hundreds of thousands of dollars am I looking at if I'm going to set something up at this scale? Here's our investment list for SAP only. We've got tubing system set up, monitoring system for vacuum levels. We've got the vacuum pump. We got power in the driveway site work, which I just mentioned, extractors, releasers, we've got tanks, and we've got the shipping container. And here's the scales we looked at: 3,000, 5,000, 7, 10 and 15,000. I think this is where we're going to start to get into some numbers. So put your filters on if I start sharing a lot of numbers, and definitely scratch some notes if you see something that's in your scale, because that's what you're going to need to know. You're going to need to know, hey, I'm thinking 3,000. Just kind of focus on those lines. This is the only one I'll show you the full build out here, just to give you a sense of how this stacks up. In a second, I'm just going to shift to summaries, but starting with the 3,000 tap SAP only, just to give you a sense. Those are the items that I mentioned: the vacuum pump, extractor, tanks. The tubing, we're estimating all our tubing at about $15 a tap installed. Could be low for some regions, could be high for other regions, but that's the assumption here. 15 bucks a tap. Monitoring system, container, power driveway. And then if you look at the bottom here, this is basically the nugget that I want people to get from tonight. The details can come later. Total investment for SAP only maybe $73,000. On a per tap basis, $24. As I go through all these, I want you to remember, the numbers that we share for these research profiles are generally going to be, I think, lower than the real world. And we'll talk about what's missing in these. And you guys can all probably guess some things as we go here. But we needed a building block. So this is our building block. $73,000, $24 a tap. And I'll do a lot of rounding here too to make it easier. So here, let's look at some more SAP only profiles. Notes on the bottom, the real estate we're going to add later. And then the truck hauling, I figure about $3 to $8 a tap. I'm going to give you a wide range on truck hauling if you want to add that in. And the reason I do that is a lot of Maple enterprises have complementary business or personal assets available. So you got a $55,000 truck with a trailer and a tank. We're not using it for 12 months of the year for maple sugaring. We're maybe using it for 2 or 3 months. So there's often splitting out of things, and that may be a lower value. Some people are in a situation they got to buy a heavy duty truck just for this business, and the business needs to pay for it because you've gone back to your family and they said, nope, we're not pulling that out of the family bank account. That's coming from the business, and that's where you'll get a higher value per tap for hauling if that's your situation. So now I'm back up to the top here to this box. 3 scales here so far: 3,000 taps, 5,000 taps, 7,000 taps. This is quick and dirty numbers here, but I think really valuable for people scoping where they might want to go. We've already done the 3,000. I'll just quickly scope the 5,000 taps. Roughly $22 a tap, a little bit of a savings there on equipment. From a scale perspective, you're looking at $110,000 startup. 7,000 taps, $21 a tap, pretty much the same. You got more taps, more tubing, just about $150,000 startup cost. This is the lean and mean number, 150. I'd all suggest you kind of factor a bit higher. And now we get to some of the bigger scales. 10,000 taps, still in that same range, $21.50 a tap, but now your capital access point goes that much higher, whether it's coming from your own savings or it's coming from capital providers. You're looking at $200,000 at least. And the 15,000 taps, we're at the same investment per tap pretty much, but now we're looking at $300,000 startup. And not to joke about it, but I call this kind of the pay to play kind of model here, right? We need to understand, if we want to be at certain scales, what kind of capital do we need to bring to the table or source if we want to get into Maple at this scale of enterprise. All right, so now we're going to combine SAP and then the processing. I'm going to do another quick and dirty. We're going to take all the SAP collection items from before, and now we're going to add some key sugar house and processing investments. We're going to build a sugar house at around $50 to $50 per square foot. We're going to put in a reverse osmosis unit. We're going to have concentrate tanks, permeate tanks. We got to buy barrels. We don't have to, actually that's an option, but we're going to consider buying barrels. We know a lot of the buyers do have premiums if you own your own barrels. We need an evaporator, we need a filter press, we need some miscellaneous tools at best. This model basically gets us to syrup in the barrel. We're not including separate canners and small retail packaging here. Keeping it very simple just to see what's the processing setup going to look like. Here's the scales we looked at here. Again, I'm going to have fact sheets that'll go out later this year. We'll try to break these down. 5,000 taps direct to the sugar house. We like that model, right? 10,000 taps direct to the sugar house. That's pretty groovy if you got 10,000 taps that all flow to a sugar house. Real world for people, right? We know we've got 7,000 tap operators that maybe are going to be leasing 3,000 someplace else. So our bottom 2 models here is 10,000 taps with 7,000 taps coming direct to the sugar house and a satellite bush taking the information I showed you before and hauling that SAP back. We've got a 20,000 tap model, assuming there's 15,000 taps going straight to the sugar house and there's a 5,000 tap satellite bush. When we get done publishing these, the goal is that you'll be able to mix and match a little bit, right? You'll be able to see this kind of 3,000 sap only startup, and you'll also be able to see the 5,000 tap kind of sugar house setup, and you maybe be able to move things around a little bit based on what situation you may have or kind of what you might look for. Here are some of our assumptions for the sap processing. I'm going to probably glaze over this faster than some of you diehard sugar makers may like. I'm the financial guy, I'm the economics guy. Rob Gay, who I work with, really work with the industry professionals and the equipment dealers on the efficiency. And everyone, what Rob would say, everyone's got sort of a different mindset about how they want to handle the sizing of equipment. And so some of the assumptions that we've got built into these that are worth sharing is we felt the 5,000 tap was really going to be possibly a part-time venture for somebody, but also probably a single human being or a small group of people that we're going to have to balance running the evaporator and managing the woods. So the equipment is scaled for a 4 or 5 hour runtime on the RO and the evaporator, assuming we got to have some hours for these small number of individuals to be working in the woods. As we move up to the 10,000 and 20,000 taps, we understand there's the potential for someone to be more full-time, and there also to be different hired labor built into the equation. And that's where we've got this, the equipment is scaled more for 6, 7, 8 hours of runtime on the evaporator. You know, we're not asking people to work 17-hour days here in our model. We know that the people that can afford labor can run those evaporators more full-time. Maybe someone's in the sugar house watching the processing, and somebody else can be out in the woods managing leaks and assessing the dynamics in the sugar bush. But we know that's not often possible and maybe not realistic for someone at a smaller scale that's basically doing all the tasks. So that's a little bit on the sizing of the equipment. I mentioned the sugar house, about $50 to $55 per square foot. And then I've got some direct to sugar house profiles. The shipping container comes out of those profiles. The ones that are blended, have still a partial cost for some satellite equipment storage and some building for the people that have sap coming direct to their sugar house, but also are hauling sap in from some other sites. Okay, this is just the big one to show you the different categories, and then I'll do what I did before and I'll go through to just the summary. So looking at that 5,000 tap enterprise with the sap flowing direct to the sugar house, I'll just blow through the lines here. We've got the sap collection that was all bundled in that earlier profile. And then I actually take out some of the containers in different profiles that we don't have a satellite bush here. We've got a home base of the sugar house. We've got sugar house construction. We've got reverse osmosis, concentrate, permeate, evaporator, filter press, miscellaneous tools, barrels. At any point when I go through these profiles, when you can think of the additional things that you have to buy or that you want to have for your enterprise, you need to add them in. I can't know exactly what they are, but I can tell you that I think that these are, by design, somewhat underestimated because we can't quite get the whole business in, like the stuff I showed you earlier, the stuff that we get at the kitchen table. This is the startup. This is basically buying the equipment. And you need to remember it's going to cost more than just buying the equipment. There's always going to be more stuff coming up. So 5,000 tap, look at the bottom summary, and I've done this. I've underlined the total cost here as a general thing for you to see, and then the total cost per tap bottom line. So 5,000 taps, you could be looking at over $200,000 in investment at a total cost per tap of at least $41.55. And remember, no real estate yet. This is no real estate. We're just building up the pieces here. It gets more expensive if you want to buy your real estate. So we're going to go through the processing profiles here. We just did the 5,000. Now we look at 10,000 direct to the sugar house. We know our SAP total is around 200,000. Our processing subtotal around 150,000. That gets us to over $350,000 in investments for a 10,000 tap operation, or around $35 a tap. Real estate will be added later. So I'd say scratch away some notes. If you're thinking 5 or 10,000, just get the per tap number and the total as a benchmark for yourself here. I'm looking at some bigger ones here. We got the two models here. If you look at the columns on this table, I've got the 10,000 tap, which is 7,000 direct to the sugar house and 3,000 hauled in. And the 20,000 tap enterprise is 15,000 right to the sugar house and 5,000 hauled in. And I'm just going to look right down at the bottom numbers and say 10,000 taps, you're over 360,000 at around 36.90, call it $37 a tap. And at the 20,000 tap, you're well over 600,000, and you're looking at about 31.55 per tap based on just what we included in this model. Again, real estate's coming, and you got to add the truck in. Well, we got to add $3 to $8 a tap, depending on what your preference is for truck and what your setup is, or some other means. If it's a tractor and trailer and tank hauling, if that's feasible, that's something you could factor in. And in a few minutes, I'll show you all the things that are not included here that are going to be, possible add-ons. I think this is important. Looking at the investment comparison, what's the distinction between just doing the SAP only and doing the full SAP and processing side of things? And you can see on the left, we've got a 5,000 tap scenario here, about $22 a tap, almost double if we add the SAP processing, the syrup processing component to this business. Okay, so you're thinking about capital access and you're thinking about, geez, $200,000 sounds like a lot of money. Well, $400,000 will be a lot more. And so you're thinking about the distinction there. At 15,000 taps, we see that difference shrink a little bit. SAP only just shy of $21 a tap, and then the full processing as well would get us up to 31. And I think that's something we certainly know that business managers are assessing. They're assessing, do they go in with the full processing? Do they need the brand? Do they want to bring it all the way to syrup? Or do they think they can have a decent enterprise and do the work they may like to do in the woods? Those are great things to be thinking about when you're thinking about starting up or expanding. So quick review of what we covered. Equipment and tubing setup, the basic land improvements, the sugar house construction, the processing equipment to get the syrup to bulk. I've mentioned the additional costs here. That truck hauling factor is something you've got to add in, and there's still some stuff missing here that we'll talk about in a little bit for sure. But I really want to get into the real estate module so you can at least understand the dynamic of adding owned forest land. One of the complaints, or I guess observations I got early on when we started our benchmarking work, was we got all these investment analyses, but we don't have real estate. Some of the people we started working with early on, a lot of them had already owned their real estate. Not to say there's no cost there, but a lot of people had legacy and long-term maple enterprises, and they already own their forest land. And I think it's also important to note when we do cost of production analysis, if you own your property, we definitely will factor in your taxes and insurance, but there isn't what we call operating costs to owning real estate. It's actually considered an investment. So when you're looking at some of our research reports, I want you to understand that dynamic, that real estate is something we kind of factor in from a balance sheet perspective. If you've heard the term balance sheet, we talk about equity and investments that people are making. But hopefully that real estate is not going down in value, which is different than the equipment and the land improvements that we often have in our analyses. Those things do decline in value. Things get old, things get tired, and we call that a cost to the business, the depreciation of those items. But from a real estate perspective, it often goes in a different category. And it's unfortunate sometimes because these are big numbers, and I don't want people to think that we don't think they're important. We just we have different techniques. So how are we going to add real estate to these profiles I just showed you? Well, I generally assume 55 taps an acre, something we've come to from the participants we've had. It may be different for your region, so definitely test that assumption. And then we know people have different values for forest land, depending where they are. I've worked with some people outside some metro areas in Pennsylvania, Western New York, and boy, they're pushing this $3,000 to $4,000 per acre forest land, and they're wondering if they can they pencil out a maple investment. That may be very different than something in northeastern Vermont. Could be a much different land value. Also, maybe have a different productive capacity. So here are our estimates, though. At $1,000 an acre, we're looking at $18 a tap going into that profile. $2,000 an acre, add $36 a tap, and at $3,000 an acre, you're going to add $55 a tap to those profiles that I already shared with you. And through all of these, the other kind of don't forget warning is, don't forget year 1 to 3 operating capital. I've definitely worked with people, unfortunately, after they've done big land deals, after they've maybe done conservation easements, and people have figured out how to invest in the business startup, and then they say, oh, I'm not breaking even year 1, year 2, year 3. Yeah, we know that. I mean, as a business advisor, we know that businesses often can't turn a profit till 3 or 4 years in. That's expected, especially in a capital intensive business. So please don't set up a whole business and underestimate the running costs. Just year one, you got to set up before you start to sell your syrup and barrels. So you know you got at least 12 months there, 8 months if you're lucky, if you set this thing up in October and you're selling in April. But generally, you're going to need some operating capital to bridge that startup. So please factor that in. Here's a big table here. I'm going to give you some lines here to make this a little easier here. So let's look at the 3,000 tap startup, okay? This is SAP only. Now we're adding the real estate. So the SAP only numbers I showed you about 10 minutes ago, if we add in real estate at $1,000 an acre, we're looking at $42 a tap. $2,000 an acre, $60 a tap. $3,000 an acre, $79 a tap. And then this becomes our grand total, right? If we're going to invest in the whole thing, land and equipment, set it up from scratch, this is how much capital we're going to need to access. So I'm hoping you all can filter your scale and maybe your acreage here so you don't get confused by all the numbers. Let's just take a quick scan. When we see a 5,000 tap enterprise out there, how much money are these people putting into the business? Well, at the different valuations per acre, we can get a sense of, how much value they got built up in running that maple operation and owning the real estate. Okay. And then at 7,000 taps, SAP only now, right? SAP only 7,000 taps. The low end here, we're just under 300,000 at 1,000 an acre. If we get up to $3,000 per acre, we're now cresting a $500,000 in investment. SAP only, still no sugar house, but we gotta prepare for the investments. I'll just pause for a second, we'll absorb that, and we're gonna move on to some larger SAP. Now we've got our 10,000 tap enterprise. The numbers get bigger, right? You may notice some of our per tap costs go down a little bit at scale, but we've got a significant amount of real estate that we're going to have to acquire if we're going to try to go all in with the forest land. So now we see the magnitude of these businesses. When someone's running 10,000 taps, even SAP alone, we can see $395,000 investment up to over 765, and you've heard me say it like 5 times, and these are underestimates. It's going to cost more to really get a business running because we haven't considered every stapler and every screwdriver that you're going to need to run it. 15,000 taps, SAP only again. Great scale for a SAP only business, but really a significant capital endeavor. For some of you, if you're at a smaller scale and you're wondering, why is this guy always talking about 10, 15,000 tap enterprises? I think we do know that there are some breakpoints and some distinctions between owner-operators and what they can muster in their own time, and then often around the 10 or 15,000 tap scales where we see businesses hitting a certain magnitude where they can stand on their own legs as a business, often providing at least full-time employment for an owner or a hired person. So we know that there is something about these larger scales that do hit what I'll call commercial scale that can not make it easier, but they can kind of make a business model more appropriate than what we may see at a smaller scale with people really trying to figure out how to navigate other jobs, other careers, and maybe a lot of direct marketing. Okay, so now we're doing processing profiles. I'm going to cruise here a little bit. I'm hoping you guys are familiar with the dynamics so we can get to questions. You'll see I've kind of partitioned the acres. I just cut the 2,000 acre one out to simplify it here. Our publications will give you some more detail. But now we've got SAP and processing, 5,000 taps direct to the sugar house. This is a sense of magnitude. $1,000 an acre, $300,000 investment all in, plus the factor of these being underestimates. $3,000 an acre really shooting up, much more significant investment. And then again, 10,000 taps direct. Look at that spread between $53 an acre and $90 an acre. And you can see these are significant businesses. The few people we know that are running larger enterprises have a significant amount of capital engaged in their maple enterprises. And the biggest ones we looked at here, 10,000 taps mixed, $55 a tap and $1,000 an acre, 92 at $3,000 an acre. I can't tell you where the break even is at these acres yet. We haven't gotten that far, haven't investigated to that level of detail yet. but I'm betting some of you may be wondering about that for your regions. And the 20,000 taps mixed again, you're going to see the per tap number goes down a little bit because we do see some efficiencies in the processing capacity once you start to invest in the sugar house at that scale. However, at that scale, that's a lot of taps to manage. We're not talking about labor, we're just talking about setup here. So almost $1 million and $1,000 an acre, and at $3,000 an acre, well over $1.5 million. Okay, so why the actual benchmarks higher, right? Why are the numbers that I get at the kitchen table higher? And I would say for you all, when these publications come out, or if you scratch numbers, I would say $15 to $20 higher than what I've offered in my reports would be a wise result, a wise kind of guidance. One of the reasons is we didn't get into off-road vehicles, utility vehicles. We didn't get into the snowmobiles and the track vehicles. We know those things have to happen. We just looked at basically the SAP setup. We weren't getting all the investment for labor. And so that's a limitation of this work, but it's also the warning I'll tell you now. You got to factor in for those things. Tools and other equipment. I mean, how many of you have a few $1,000s worth of tool in your tool shed already? How many of you have other pieces of equipment, skidders, different things for doing woods work that you've already kind of built up? Those are things that often come with a whole business that don't come in a startup package if you're talking just to a maple company. Little stuff like office supplies, right? You got to have computers, you got to have printers, you got to be able to do your accounting and things of that nature. The other thing, this model looks at just getting syrup into bulk barrels, but we know a lot of the producers, even bulk producers, we know they've got some canning capacity, they've got some packing capacity, maybe even a candy machine, something like that, because they're doing some sales on the side. So the real world dynamic is often going to be more expensive than the startup. And I will just say that again. If you go and work with an installer or a manufacturer, they're going to be honest and tell you what the equipment costs. Go to our benchmark reports to sort of have that reminder that there's a lot more to running a business than just setting up the maple part of it. Okay, we're wrapping up here. I'm glad, well, I can't see if you're awake because I don't have the view. I hope you are. A couple other factors here to consider. Our benchmark reports, we have looked at high yield producers and lower yield producers based on the dynamic of the people in our group. So if we work with 15 or 20 people, we've just said what's our average yield across the group and how many people are above it. Generally, the people that I've worked with the benchmarking have been higher yield producers. We often see over 5 pounds, 6 pounds, regularly seeing over 0.4 gallons a tap, over 0.5 gallons per tap production from a lot of these producers that participate. So we know that they are probably invested more heavily in some technology. And you'll see that the above average yield producers often will have a little bit more invested in their business than some of the below average. And I don't know if that's significant or not, but I just see there's a difference there. And I want to note that your management style and sort of the way you operate and the goals you set will certainly impact how you make your investments and what you maybe cut on and what you kind of go big on. Going back to this one, I think there's another couple dynamics that I'll just mention with why the real world numbers are going to be higher. I've worked with a lot of managers that have redundancy built in. They've got 2-3 pumps. They know that if something breaks down, that they can't wait even a day or two for servicing. So a lot of redundancy is built up, especially in the larger enterprises. Inventory of items, multiple pieces of equipment, dual purpose things of that nature. So that's kind of another example of things that aren't going to show up in these models that are very present in the real world that often make things potentially more expensive to start up. Okay, so thanks for hanging in there. Just going to wrap up and summarize before we go to questions. Like I said, I think these are course models. They're meant to provide kind of a realization of what the investment is if you go at moving towards commercial scale and moving towards the modern maple investments, knowing what that looks like, and then also knowing what that growth step may be. If you're at 2,500 taps and you're thinking maybe we should go 5,000, we want you to have an idea of what that looks like to make that growth step. We certainly want you to have a sense of your capital access options, whether it's going to be within your own kind of savings or equity, or if you're going to be borrowing it. And if there's any lenders or other people in the industry on tonight, we want people to be aware of what these enterprises do cost. We need good capital providers and capital partners, I'll say, on board for the dynamic of these investments. And then I just got to mention performance measures and monitoring. All these things are things that we track as financial advisors, and we work with people on. And tracking your costs, tracking your investments, it's a big part of this, because there's a lot of money moving through these businesses, and we certainly hope you've got the measuring stick to keep track of it all. I'm going to stop there. We've got the chat box available for questions, comments. Mark Iselhard, I'm going to ask you if you could help me as well. I think we're going to give people the chance to, you may not get unmuted, but you may see a little option that says you can unmute yourself when we get there. So if you get that and you want to ask a question out loud, we'll just kind of have a open mic on that. And let's also give people a chance to, ask a question. And if you don't mind just hanging out for a few minutes, give other people a chance to ask. And it looks like Mark in the chat said the mics are able to be unmuted. So if you want to ask a question, go for it, or hit the chat and we'll moderate that as it comes in. And by all means, if you also just want me to go back to any slides, I'd be more than welcome to, or more than willing to go back and click back.
Hey, Mark, while we're waiting for one of the attendees to ask, maybe I'll ask you a question about investment and like the lifespan. Some of the people you've dealt with in the benchmark, do you have a kind of rough lifespan of the tubing systems that you work with people, or at least recommendations on don't expect beyond a certain time?
Yeah.
As far as productivity?
Yeah, great question. So I think lifespan kind of comes in two forms. For me as a financial person, it's kind of like, when are you going to need to replace the thing? And then also, how does it hold its value? So like some things like tubing systems, we would, as a financial person, I'd put a lifespan of maybe 15 years on a mainline system. I think we do see from some of our survey work we did a couple years ago that something like tubing systems are going to be on probably a 10 to 15 year turnover. The unique thing about maple technology is it's changing. And so often people will say, look at tubing as an example, 15, 17 years in, they say, well, more like call it 10 to 12 years in, they'll say, my tubing system still has life, but they've actually improved the tubing layout. So it may be obsolete in the sense of it may not be the best system for me, even if it still has some lifespan. So that's just kind of a quick idea. A lot of the hard assets, the equipment, we usually lifespan them 7 to 10 years financially. When the market was really growing, 2014, 15, 16, a lot of people would say, this stuff is a year older, but it's not losing value because there's so much churn with people buying equipment. That was the situation 3 or 4 years ago. It's going to be a new dynamic now as some things have kind of mellowed out. Well, before kind of a short crop year, sometimes equipment loses value more quickly, and other times trading and selling enables equipment to actually hold its value. So that's a good financial consideration back to the lifespan is, what's the resale value?
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Don't be shy, folks. Feel free to ask questions or hit the chat box.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, this is Keith Easley. You laid out these scenarios, where kind of somebody just, drops down this money and he's got a 10,000 tap operation. How many, I guess, in my situation, it's kind of starting with 200 and growing. How many of these operations, did that, just started out with a huge operation, or have just built it up over the years?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I will say that a lot of the larger enterprises I have worked with definitely started at some sort of scale early on. And I'm looking to Northern Vermont here when I say this. A lot of folks have a long legacy. So maybe their parents started off at a few hundred taps and maybe that grew to a couple thousand. But by the time they got in, 3,000 or 4,000 taps wasn't sort of a daunting scale. So there is some sort of legacy there for some situations. I will also say that I get calls and inquiries. This is a big capital game at scale, and we do have people that are entering, weather-wise or not. We do have people entering Maple at a larger scale, and that's a real. I don't know how to say this. There's a real kind of tension there. I'm hesitant, and this is from my work with farmers across the board. I'm hesitant for people to think that it's a good business idea to start small and gradually grow incrementally, because I know there are sort of deadfalls in the growth scale of any business. We've dealt with this with sheep flocks. We're dealing with it now with dairy goats in Vermont. So I'm always hesitant to say people should grow gradually, because I do think there are certain sweet spots, pardon the pun, and there are certain sort of black holes for scale where you kind of have to leapfrog to the next scale. The tension, however, is if someone starts a 7,000 tap enterprise with no experience, maybe no love for maple, like some of you have that kind of carries you through, that's a risky way to start a business. And so I can't really tell you the best way to go about it, but I feel like I've seen both, and I think I've seen people succeed and people not do so well, either starting from scratch big or growing and maybe struggling through some of those scaling issues. Because who wants to rebuild a sugar house? Who wants to resize certain footprints? That can be tricky. So that's kind of a vague answer. It depends, but I think those are exactly the questions that I think it's a great question for you all to ask yourself. Like, what's your dynamic? What's your personality? And what's your capital position? Great question.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark.
Oh, I recognize that voice.
Yeah,
Hey.
This is Jamie and Jamie.
All right. What's happening? What do you got?
Hey, how are you?
Question. Good.
Hey, thanks for inviting us to this. Really appreciate it. Really like listening to you and learning from you. So for me, like seeing those big numbers is really quite intimidating. When before not thinking about how much money it's actually going to cost to go kind of big and be profitable. But like Keith was just saying, we've got a lot of equipment from the last couple of years that are obviously going to carry on. But I guess my question is like the access to capital. My concern is like going to a bank and even having the homework done. Like I feel like it'll be hard to convince somebody that I need a loan for this much money and that this business is going to be profitable when we're looking at the amount of money per tap that it costs to start up.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple of things on, capital. When we get off, if any of you want to look up the 5 C's of credit or the 5 C's of capital access, you'll see the different factors that a lender would look at. And kind of going back to the earlier question, your experience in the industry plays a role in sort of in accessing capital, both from your own confidence level and from the confidence level of the lender if they're going to lend you money. And this is where I'd say it is intimidating. It's, I think, good to have that kind of responsible kind of pause of like, whoa, it's a lot of money. What I think is important is if you don't have experience, that's an important recognition. You know it and the lender knows it. The dynamic with owner-operator businesses is a unique dynamic where some people are going to come in and they've got some experience at a smaller scale and they can justify it. Sometimes the small scale experience, 100 tap experience, maybe doesn't even justify saying I want to manage a 5,000 tap enterprise. And this is where it gets really unique to figure out, both for yourself and for sort of, accountability to a lender. Are there different ways to get that experience, right? Like, is starting your own business and building up over time the way to do it? Or we've often said this, is it important to manage at somebody else's enterprise? Is it important to put some time in, whether it's volunteering or working for somebody that's a larger scale enterprise? That then kind of can provide that managerial training that often from the third party's perspective of like, they say, oh, I can see that person knows how to manage because they did it working someplace else. You built the resume, so to speak. So
Sure,
those
yeah.
are just 2 quick answers. The 5 C's of credit are just some bullet points that people can look up. Experience is important. Good projections. I think that's why we're putting out this financial stuff so people can have realistic projections of what to expect. I'd say the other third, fourth, fifth thing is partnerships. I think a lot of people have this idea they got to do it on their own. These numbers are big. Not everyone's going to have, I don't have that capital. Think about partnerships. And I think that's where the industry is evolving now. We do see partnerships. We see people working with landowners and partnering up. And we see different ways people are accessing the capital other than thinking they got to come up with it all on their own. And so I think there's some opportunity there to think a little differently about bringing the team together, so to speak.
Yeah, great. Thanks, man. And we actually just dealt with that a little bit, talking with a couple of women that we're dealing with through the USDA and the way they do their loans for beginning farmers, and having a little bit of experience, like you said, managing somebody else's farm or just being on somebody else's farm working with them.
Yeah, exactly. I'll wait, see if we probably have time for one or two more questions. The lending community, it will depend on the lender, but if people are new to that world, some people, the term would be loan to value ratio. So some lenders would be sort of at an 80, call it 80-20 loan to value, in the sense of they'll maybe lend 80% of the value of the equipment, means you got to come up with 20 yourself. In other situations, it may be like 90-10, especially when you get into some of the federal programs or some of the specialty kind of ag support programs, you may see 90-10. So that means if you got $100,000 in equipment, you're going to have to come up with 10 yourself, and the lender would bring 90,000 to the table. That'd be like a 90-10. In 80-20, $100,000 worth of equipment, the lender will bring $80,000 to the table, and you as the owner would be needing 20 as a down payment. This is sort of the capital you need to put in to get in the game. So that's another term there, loan to value, you can look for when you're working with lenders, and just be ready for that kind of dynamic of the borrowing, the amount of down payment, and we haven't even talked about payback. This is just about the startup. The payback, that's our cash flow. All right, quiet group. Well, I probably did blindside you with about 30 slides worth of financials. Any last question from anyone we haven't heard of? And Mark, maybe scan if you see anything in the chat.
No questions in the chat. Oh, looks like Jamie just put in, is it important to consider the interest rate and adding that back to the cost per tap?
Yeah, great question. We would definitely interest rates factor in, and those are things that will kind of happen on a cash flow projection where we're looking at repayment capacity. Generally, the interest rate was not something we kind of consider in the startup. We would address that in the payback and the income expense statements. But from the startup, we're really looking at the capital access point of like, can we get in the game, so to speak? Do we have the down payment? Do we have a willing capital provider? Or do we have to find some other way to make the investments? Good question. All right, well, for sake of time here, we want to keep these tight to an hour and let you get on with your day or your evening. Just to remind everyone, I think we're maybe 2 or 3 weeks out. Birch syrup flavor is going to be the next webinar, and then we've got a couple more staggered about every 2 weeks, going into mid-October. So check out our website. Love to have you back for another session as the series continues. All right, good night, everybody.